So here are our doodle notes for the first part of blood here. We're only going to do these first 3 pages, and we'll save the last 2 that are about the vessels and the heart for another time when we get to that. So first with composition of blood. Plasma. Depending on the person, it's like 90% water. I think in the notes I said like 94, but it's mostly water is really what we're getting at. And the other 10% is stuff that's dissolved in that water, or solutes. Now we're only talking about the liquid parts of the blood, so obviously not the cells. They'll be over here. So the cells, if we separated them out, like what's happening in this test tube, if you took somebody's blood and spun it around in a centrifuge, then all the cells would kind of settle down here, and your plasma would be left up here, and it's 90% water, 10% everything else. Some of the solutes that you would find in blood would be salts, minerals, food molecules, gases like carbon dioxide, waste, and proteins. Forgot how to spell proteins for a minute. Specifically, there are 3 proteins that are found in your blood all the time. They're kind of supposed to be there. You'd see more about them in the notes. We're just going to write their names here. Albumin, which helps to keep fat dissolved. Globulins, which help to keep vitamins dissolved. And fibrinogen, which helps platelets do their blood clotting thing. So in our test tube here, a picture of a test tube. Plasma yellow. This top part would be plasma. And depending on the person, we're actually going to do a paper about this later this week. It's about half plasma. So this was their total blood volume from their sample. About half of that sample would be plasma. So like 55-ish. It depends on if it's male or female, how big or small the person is, stuff like that, how much water you've been drinking, etc. So to see more about this test tube thing here is called a hemocrit. We'll see more about that in a couple days. We're going to do one of these on paper. The red blood cells. Their fancy science name. Erythrocytes, which literally means red cell. Erythro is red, cell, so red cell. These guys are made in your red bone marrow. Remember, like in long bones, it has that cavity in the middle where the bone marrow is. That's where these red blood cells are made. They don't have any organelles or a nucleus. They don't really need them. All they're going to do is carry oxygen. They don't need organelles. And they stay in your blood vessels, which we'll see is not necessarily the case for the white blood cell. Yes, I can move my camera down a little bit here so you guys can see the thing. There we go. So if they don't have organelles in them, then what do they have in them? They have hemoglobin, a whole lot of hemoglobin. And hemoglobin contains iron, which is used to carry the oxygen. So when we say that red blood cells carry oxygen, it's actually the hemoglobin that's grabbing and carrying the oxygen molecules. Find something red. Human blood is always red. If somebody's told you it was blue, they don't know what they're talking about. This is as close to red as I can get. It's kind of an orangey. So when you did this in a test tube, the red blood cells would separate to the bottom. And that would be about 45%-ish. Again, it depends on the person. And you can actually, RBC is red blood cell. You could actually based on how many red blood cells they have, determine if they have any like disorders or diseases versus how much plasma they have and other stuff like that. So we'll see this again later on. This little part in the middle it's written on the side here. It's called the buffy coat. And that is here's buffy coat. That's your white blood cells and platelets. And this right here is like less than 1%. It's not a lot. It's a very tiny little layer. So the plasma would separate out on top. The red blood cells would separate in the middle. And there's like a little thin layer, very tiny thin one. And that's where you'd have your platelets and white blood cells. So speaking of white blood cells, they're also known as leukocytes. Leuko means white, so this means white cells or clear cells. So if you look at blood under a microscope, you'll definitely see all the red blood cells. They look like little red inner tubes. And the white blood cells just look like regular cells. They're basically clear. So white cells are clear cells. These guys, they're also made in the red marrow. These two come from the same stem cells, but some white blood cells develop in other areas, like they kind of become more mature. So we'll see more about that. This next page is about the leukocytes. These ones, though, do have organelles. E-U-S. Oh my gosh, I need to get my head on this morning. This is about the nucleus. So white blood cells can reproduce themselves, which is handy because if they discover a thing that is deadly, and now they know to stop and kill that deadly thing, well, every time they do mitosis to make daughter cells, then they can pass on that knowledge that they gained. Red blood cells don't need to do mitosis because they just get, the bone marrow will make more. The easiest way to say about these is there's a lot of types of them. We'll see more about them on the next page. There's many types, so. We'll see more about those on the next page, so you can draw yourself kind of like an arrow over to that next page to remind yourself to look over there. And lastly, platelets. Some places call them thrombocytes, but that's kind of misleading because they're not cells. So I'll write that down for you just in case you see that word. But cytes would mean that it's a cell, but they're actually not a cell. There we go. They're not cells, they're actually fragments of cells. There are special stem cells that kind of pinch off parts of their cytoplasm and they become platelets. So they're really just like small chunks of cell. But what they do they clot your blood. When a wound occurs, they're the thing that stops the bleeding. I'm just realizing I forgot something in white blood cells. Let me go up and add it again. Your white blood cells can actually move out of your blood vessels. White blood cells can be in the blood, out of the blood, and pretty much any tissue. Red blood cells have to stay in the blood, because if not, that's called bleeding, and that's not good. But if you do start to bleed and lose some of your red blood cells, then your platelets can block up the hole. There are some diseases and conditions where platelets stick together when they shouldn't be sticking together and can cause a clot inside of your blood vessel, which is not great. You're going to cut off blood circulation to an organ. Not good times. To the leukocytes. So, first of all, see these categories over here? Granulocytes means they look grainy, like you can see grainy bits in them. And agranulocytes means that they're not grainy. So when you look at a sample of blood, if you see a white blood cell that looks like it has spots in it, then it's one of these granulocytes. If you see a white blood cell that doesn't look like that, then it's one of these. These are their names going down the side and a picture of them. You see, since they have a nucleus and organelles, one of the things we can use to identify them is their nucleus. It's like neutrophils have this multiple lobed nucleus. Eosinophils have 2 lobes. Basophils have this weird shape. Lymphocyte is kind of hard to see here because it copied really dark. It's this thing here because it's a slightly darker gray. They have a huge nucleus. It takes up most of the cell, the lymphocytes. And then the one at the bottom, monocytes, has like a kidney-shaped nucleus. So if you looked at these under the microscope, you could tell they were white blood cells because you'd be able to see a nucleus and other things. And then you could get more specific and say if they're granulocytes or agranulocytes based on if you see these spots. And then you can get even more specific and say which kind they are based on their nucleus. And with these 3, their names come from which kind of stain you would use to be able to see them. It's really, if you took blood and just any cells really and just threw them on a microscope slide, it wouldn't look like much because cells are mostly just clear, except for red blood cells. They do look red. But we can use different stains. It's basically like a dye. Sort of like if you were to dye your hair a color, it's basically the same idea with stains. You're just staining your cells. You're dyeing them a color. So neutrophils are the most common white blood cell. WBC is white blood cell. And they like to attack bacteria specifically. Or, here's a biology word for us. Phagocytize, which is a little more specific. When phagocytosis happens, when the cell reaches out and surrounds the thing and pulls it inside. So it's basically when we say that white blood cells are attacking, they're doing phagocytosis. Google phagocytosis. Phagocytosis. Google that if you're not sure about that. Or basically they attack bacteria. And the reason these are called neutrophils is because the kind of stain you need to use on them is neutral. Like in terms of the pH scale, it's not an acid or a base. Use a neutral stain on that, and then you can see neutrophils. So if you're trying to find a neutrophil within a bunch of blood, you could put it on a slide, put some of this neutral stain on there, and then the neutrophils would be in color, so you'd know that they were there. Eosinophils have this kind of 2-lobed thing going on with their nucleus and the grains going on. These mostly phagocytize or attack. I'm going to say attack for the rest of these, but I mean phagocytize. They like to go after parasites, specifically worms. And they have a type of stain called eosin. See the names in there, eosin. Which is acidic, so they need an acidic stain to be able to see those. Specifically one called eosin. Basophils, they don't really attack anything specifically. They just kind of ramp up the immune response. So once we're in this unit, once we're done with talking about like the heart and the blood vessels, then we'll go into the immune system and the lymphatic system more specifically and what it does. So for now, just kind of hang on to the immune system idea. It'll come back later. And they, as you can probably guess, they have a basic stain. All right, let me move my camera down. Lymphocytes. They have that really huge nucleus compared to the others. They're called lymphocytes because they usually hang out in lymph tissue. And if you're like, what the heck's a lymph? Those are like your lymph nodes, your spleen, things like that. We'll talk about that with the immune system later on. And there's different kinds of lymphocytes depending on like what part of the immune system they're working with. So within the lymphocyte category, we have T cells, B cells, and natural killer cells, which is kill everything. They attack and kill everybody. So we'll come back to this idea more because these cells kind of work together once they notice that something is in the body that shouldn't be there, and then they get other white blood cells to come and help. There's a whole process of things that happen. So we'll come back to that idea. Myocytes are called myocytes while they're in the blood. Sorry, monocytes. Wow, what the heck am I doing? But once they leave the blood and go into another tissue, we call them macrophages. You've seen some of these already, some of these macrophages. We didn't call them that, but we've seen them. Like there were macrophages that are in bone and they digest the old bone so that it can be recycled into new bone. You have some macrophages that hang out in your skin. You have macrophages that are in your lymph tissue, and every tissue has macrophages chilling out in there. So some macrophages can be more specific and stay in that tissue, like the ones that are in bone pretty much always hang out in that bone. And then there's others that just kind of roam around in the blood and pop up when they're needed. So for now, you should know basically that there's different kinds of white blood cells, and kind of in general, they attack different things or they do different things for the immune system. And just in general, like what's the difference between these types? Later on, when we do the immune system, we'll come back more specifically to what things do which thing at what part, how we go from having bacteria or something in our body to having it killed by white blood cell. One more page. Eventually we will do some blood type activities. For my people who are in class, we're waiting on stuff to get delivered. So it'll be whenever it's here is when we'll do it. So we have 4 blood types. This is just the A, B, and O. The plus and minus is an RH factor, which is a separate protein. We'll see more about blood types later on. We'll do a whole bunch of stuff on them. But basically, if you are blood type A, it's red blood cell, RBC. This would be A, B, AB, and O. If you are blood type A, then that means you have a protein on your red blood cells that they call group A. I'm going to color it just to kind of get the point across here. I randomly picked orange. There's really no reason to specifically pick orange. So this is A. If you are group B, then you would have the B proteins, which they are showing as little diamonds or squares here. If you are type AB, then you have both. I had the green in my hand, so I did that one first. But you have both the A and the B. And if you're type O, you have neither. It actually was supposed to be type 0 because they don't have any of these. So your immune system, one of the ways that it notices that things aren't supposed to be there is they have antibodies floating around in your body, and those antibodies are kind of like little flags or markers that will stick onto things that aren't supposed to be there. So if you are blood type A, you have antibodies against type B. So if anything type B were to come into your system, your immune system would attack it like it's supposed to do, because you're not supposed to have that type of blood. It's not yours. They should kill it and remove it. But, you know, in this case, it's not good, because then, you know, if you got the wrong blood, let's say you needed a blood transfusion because you lost all your blood, somebody's trying to save you, but they give you the wrong kind. Well, they give you the wrong kind of blood. The antibodies are going to attack it. Then the white blood cells are going to attack it, and they'll kill all your blood cells and clot up your blood, and you die. So not good times. But if you have type A, then your antibodies are called anti-B. If you have blood type B, then they're called anti-A, because they're against type A. Type AB, they don't have any. They like everybody. And type O has both anti-A and anti-B. This is not including the Rh factor, the plus and minus. So Rh factor is a separate protein. So if you were A positive, you would have both the A protein and the Rh protein on your red blood cells. And the same kind of thing could happen there. If you are Rh positive, meaning you have those pieces, then you can't give your blood to somebody who's Rh negative, because then their immune system would attack it. And the last row who can they receive blood from? Well, if you're group A, obviously, you can get it from other A's, assuming that your pluses or minuses work out. So A positives can give to A positives. A negatives can give to A negatives. And negatives can also give to positives, because negative just means they don't have the Rh factor. So it wouldn't bother somebody who does have the Rh factor, because there's nothing there. Like O's can also give to both, because O doesn't have either of those antigens on it. So it can give to anybody. B's can get blood from other B's and also from O's. ABs can get blood from A, B, AB, or O. And from anybody. So that's called the universal recipient, meaning that they can get blood from anybody as long as the plus and minus thing goes together. So if you were AB positive, then you could get blood from A positive, B positive, AB positive, O positive, or any of the negatives. You can get blood from anybody. If you are AB negative, then you can get blood from A negative, B negative, AB negative, O negative. So AB, you can get the most blood from pretty much anybody. If you are type O, you can only get blood from other O's. If that blood happened to have an A in it, you would attack it. If it had a B in it, you would attack it. If it had AB, it would attack both. So you can only get blood from other O's. But if you notice, O can give blood to everybody else. So they are called the universal donor. We will come back to this idea again later on. I know we're kind of being vague with some of this immune system stuff. But if you know that kind of like in general that we have different blood types and you need to receive your blood type if you have blood put into you, or else your immune system will attack it and kill them, and by extension kill you. The last 2 pages we will do another day once we get to talking about the blood vessels and the heart. So it's just these 3 pages for now. Keep an eye out for the next one coming sometime next week. And I'll see you then.